The tension in Silas's office was suffocating. Maybe it was the mahogany walls closing in, or the weight of Dad's empty leather chair, still pushed against his desk as if he had just stepped out for coffee. My sister Camilla kept checking her watch, a nervous tick she'd had since childhood, counting the seconds until Dad came home to review our report cards. I wasn't supposed to be here today. Silas's email last night had caught me off guard. Charles specifically requested your presence. 3 years of silence since I left the family business, and now this. My own father's will reading. Let us begin. Silas cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, the same ones he wore at every family dinner for the past 20 years. Charles was very specific about how this should proceed. Mom sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't said much since Dad passed, but her eyes followed me as I entered. Worry? Relief? I couldn't tell. My younger sister, Josephine, was typing away on her phone, probably updating her office about yet another delayed morning. She had made partner last year, the youngest in her firm's history. Dad had been so proud he bought her a Mercedes. First, Silas began, Charles wanted me to read this letter. He pulled out an envelope, its edges yellowed with age. My heart stopped when I recognized Dad's handwriting. He had always insisted on writing everything by hand, even in the age of emails and text messages. To my family, Silas read, if you're hearing this, I have finally run out of time to fix my mistakes. And I have made many. Camilla straightened in her chair. She had been running Dad's company since his diagnosis, keeping everything exactly as he would have wanted, or so she thought. My greatest regret, Silas continued, is letting my pride overshadow my understanding. Success isn't measured by the path you follow, but by the courage to forge your own. I felt everyone's eyes shift to me. 3 years ago, I had walked away from my VP position at Dad's company to start my own tech venture. He had called it a betrayal, said I was throwing away generations of legacy for a pipe dream. We had barely spoken since. The letter went on about family values and legacy, but I was stuck on that line about courage. Dad had never used that word to describe my choices before. Then came the details. The company shares went to Camilla. No surprise there. She had been groomed for this her whole life. Josephine got the family properties and investment portfolios. Mom got the house and her existing trusts. And to my son, Ian, Silas paused, adjusting his glasses again. Just get on with it, Camilla snapped. We all know Ian gave up his right to anything substantial when he abandoned the family. Actually, Silas continued, Charles left Ian his private study, including all contents, documents, and personal effects. The room went silent. Dad's study had been his sanctuary for 40 years. None of us were ever allowed inside without his presence. Even Mom hadn't gone in there since he passed. That's it. Josephine laughed. A room full of old papers? A failure like you doesn't deserve Dad's inheritance anyway. Camilla stood up, her voice sharp. He'd be ashamed of what you became, walking away from everything he built for some ridiculous startup dream. Everyone nodded, except Mom. She was staring at her hands, a slight tremor in her fingers. Charles was very specific, Silas added. The study must remain untouched until Ian takes possession. No one else is to enter. This is ridiculous, Camilla spat. Dad wasn't thinking clearly near the end. We all know that. Ian abandoned everything. He doesn't deserve. I stood up quietly. The chair scraped against the hardwood floor, cutting through Camilla's rant. Without a word, I walked to the door. That's right, run away again. Josephine called after me. It's what you do best. I paused at the doorway, my hand on the handle. Through the window, I could see Dad's old parking spot, empty now. He used to park his car at an angle, claiming it was lucky. Small memories like that hit harder than the big ones. Silas, I said without turning around. When can I collect the study key? Tomorrow morning, he replied. Was there a hint of something in his voice? Anticipation? Ian, don't you dare, Camilla started. I closed the door behind me, cutting off her words. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, letting out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Dad's study. The one place in his world he never let anyone control but himself. My phone buzzed. A text from my technical co-founder. Hey, got that meeting with potential investors lined up. They're interested in the prototype. When can you review the pitch deck? I smiled slightly, pushing off the wall. Dad's study could wait until tomorrow. Right now, I had a company to run. What I didn't know then was that Dad's useless inheritance would change everything. But that's a story for tomorrow, after I see what 40 years of my father's secrets look like. Obsolete. That was the word Camilla used when she walked into my study that morning. Your sisters are here, Mom had said, setting down her coffee. They're in the kitchen. No lawyers this time. I found Camilla and Josephine at the breakfast table, looking uncomfortable in the morning light. The kitchen smelled of Mom's cinnamon rolls, her way of brokering peace since we were kids. We need to talk, Camilla said, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. About the company's quarterly results. I sat down, saying nothing, letting them show their cards. First, Josephine slid a tablet across the table. The numbers were bad, worse than I had imagined. The traditional market was shifting faster than anyone had predicted. Anyone except Dad. His notes had outlined this exact scenario, along with a strategy to navigate it. We're hemorrhaging clients, Camilla admitted. They're moving to newer, more agile competitors. The board is getting nervous. Her watch-checking tick was back, worse than ever. And you think that's why Dad left me the study? I asked. Because my ridiculous startup dream might save the family business? Don't be smug, Josephine snapped. We're trying to be reasonable here. I pulled out Dad's strategy document, dated 2 years ago. Did you know Dad had been preparing for this? That he'd developed a complete transformation strategy. Their blank faces answered for them. He knew the market was changing, I continued. That's why he was so interested in my company. Not because he was disappointed in me, but because he saw how it could be integrated with our traditional business to create something entirely new. I showed them the annotated reports, the market analyses, the transformation strategy, Dad's meticulous research into emerging trends, his notes on potential synergies between old and new approaches. Why didn't he tell us? Camilla's voice was small, unlike her usual confident tone. Because he wanted us to figure it out ourselves, Mom said from the doorway. We all turned. None of us had heard her come in. He always said the best lessons are the ones you learn on your own. She sat down with us, something different in her demeanor. Your father spent hours talking about this, how the industry was changing, how proud he was of each of you in different ways. Camilla's dedication to tradition, Josephine's sharp mind for strategy, Ian's courage to innovate. He saw how all of those qualities would be needed. The stock certificates in the hidden panel, I said. They're not just random investments. They're strategic positions in key technologies we'll need for the transformation. Dad wasn't just planning for the company's survival. He was planning for its evolution. Josephine picked up one of Dad's research reports, her legal training showing as she quickly processed the information. This could actually work. The integration points are clearly defined. The regulatory considerations are addressed. But the board will never approve such a radical change, Camilla interrupted. They're too conservative. I smiled for the first time. Check the voting rights analysis in the blue folder. Dad spent years quietly consolidating voting rights, building a position that would let us push through major changes, if we worked together. Camilla looked skeptical. After everything? Dad's letter, I reminded them. Success isn't measured by the path you follow, but by the courage to forge your own. He wasn't just talking about me. Mom stood up, gathering empty coffee mugs. Charles always said his greatest achievement wasn't the business. It was having 3 children stubborn enough to fight for what they believed in, even if that meant fighting each other sometimes. The kitchen fell quiet, except for the soft clink of Mom loading the dishwasher. Such a normal sound in such a pivotal moment. "The board meets next week," Camilla finally said. "If we're going to do this, we'll need to be prepared." "The strategy is solid," Josephine agreed, "but the execution has to be perfect." I pulled out my laptop. "I have some ideas about that." Dad left pretty detailed notes about the integration process. We spent the next few hours around that kitchen table, an empty cinnamon roll plate between us, building something new from Dad's legacy. Not just preserving it, but evolving it into something he had seen coming long before any of us. The board meeting. The morning of the board meeting, I found Camilla in Dad's study, holding his old coffee mug, the one with Mom's lipstick stain from her last visit. "I never understood why he spent so much time in here," she said quietly. "I thought he was just hiding from the changes happening outside." I was wrong about a lot of things. By 9:30, the boardroom was filled with familiar faces, members who had known us since we were kids. They clucked their tongues when I left to start my company. Now, they waited to watch me fail. They didn't realize they were already too late. As expected, the meeting started with the old guard resisting change, citing tradition. I let them talk. The longer they went on, the more they proved our point. Then I pulled up the numbers, not just recent losses, but Dad's full analysis, showing the inevitable decline of traditional models. The room fell silent. Josephine followed with the legal framework, demonstrating how our competitors were already positioning themselves for the future. Then Camilla stood. The board leaned forward, expecting their traditional ally. Instead, she laid out the transformation strategy, point by point, explaining how my tech company could revolutionize our core business. "This is absurd." Bernard, Dad's old friend, sputtered. "Charles would never." I pulled out a folder. Actually, this entire strategy came from Dad. He spent the last 3 years planning it. Decades of assumptions crumbled in real time. "Even if you have the votes," Bernard sneered, "you'll never get the institutional investors on board." I smiled and clicked to the next slide. Actually, we already did. Dad's strategic positions included partnerships with key investors. They weren't just on board, they were enthusiastic. That's when Mom walked in. The board members instinctively straightened up. They had always been a little afraid of her quiet authority. "Charles knew this day was coming," she said, taking her seat. "He prepared for it. The only question is whether you gentlemen want to be part of the future or part of the past." The vote wasn't even close. By noon, the old guard was out. The transformation plan was approved. Our family would maintain control, but with a new direction. My tech company would be integrated as the innovation arm, with Camilla leading traditional operations and Josephine handling strategy. Dad's final letter. After the meeting, in Dad's study, we opened his last letter. "To my children. If you're reading this, you've finally seen what I've known all along. That true legacy isn't about preserving the past but building the future." 6 months later, our integrated company is revolutionizing the industry. The old guard who called me a failure now watch from the sidelines as their own companies scramble to catch up. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so successful they have to watch helplessly as you leave them in the dust. Dad would have liked that. This is where the story ends. The future is bright. We have work to do.